Professor Ali?
Oh, yes, please.
Yes, would it be okay if we record on our end
Yeah.
your meeting? I mean, if that's okay?
Oh, you can do that too?
Yeah, I was looking at where it says share screen. We can press the record button. I haven't done it, but I can try, but I wanted your permission.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Let
You
me
can
try.
do that. Yeah.
Oh, it says please request recording permission from the meeting host.
Oh, I see.
I pressed okay. I don't know what happened.
I'll just do that. Don't worry. But, I'm not sure how to do that
Okay.
from my end, how to allow
Okay.
is it, yeah. All right. Let's, okay. Let me share. So we talk about Christianity in the Philippines earlier. How about Indonesia? So early Christian settlements, some suggest 7th century, so quite early, but most scholars would say 15th century Common Era, where you had Portuguese in Malacca, in today's Malaysia. You also had 16th century Spaniards in the Philippines. So you had Portuguese here, Francis Xavier, Jesuit order from the Jesuit order in the Moluccas. Maluku is in the eastern part of Indonesia, so 16th century. Although later on the Dutch, which was more Protestant. So you have a Spanish, a Portuguese, Catholics, and then you have the Dutch. They're a Protestant country. So they, in a way, there was a rivalry, or tension or race between Roman Catholic Church and Protestant denominations in parts of Southeast Asia. The early Christian missionaries in Southeast Asia, in Indonesia in particular, found some difficulties. It's a 17,000 islands and inaccessible. So you think, imagine this is old times. So inaccessibility is a problem. Linguistic diversity, of course, they ethnic groups are so diverse, and they, and you cannot teach the word of God if you don't speak their language or they don't understand your language. So linguistic diversity is one of the obstacles. And then that many provinces or many areas in mainland, in island Southeast Asia had become predominantly Islamic, as we talked about earlier. So that's also another barrier for them to convert the already Islamized places. And then relationship between Christianity and Dutch colonization, that's also created some problem among local peoples who saw Christianity as the religion of the colonial power. So regardless of these difficulties that they face, you had conversions of local peoples into Christianity. Some of the ethnic groups here I mentioned: Batak people, Minahasa, Halmaheras, Timor, and also Chinese descendants who already had been in different parts of Southeast Asia. They also either converted from the earlier religious tradition like Buddhism or Confucianism or Taoism, and then they convert to Christianity or Christianities. So you had different ethnic groups embracing Christian religion. So, there are a lot of denominations as a result of these missions. Just to give you some numbers, 250 denominations, but probably more. Some of the famous denomination or churches here, you have a Lutheran, and then among this Lutheran reform, you had different sub-denominations, including the church, Indonesian Bethel Church, Um, this is one of the Pentecostal churches in Indonesia from late 19th century by the Dutch, and then early 20th century. So you have the Dutch, and but then you had American, um, through the so you have this European American missionaries, and then you have local Indonesians missionizing in different part of Indonesia. Today, Christianity accounts for about up to 10%. So it's a minority, but it's quite significant minority, of which you have Protestants 7%, and then you have the Roman Catholic 3%. If you talk about Protestants in Indonesia, you talk about Protestant and the Indonesian Union of Churches and the Evangelical and Pentecostal denominations. So you have 7% combined. Then you have Roman Catholic 3%. As I mentioned earlier, we had the Orthodox Christians, right? Orthodox Christian, but you don't really a strong presence of Orthodox Christianity in Southeast Asia. You do have individuals coming in and so on, but not as a movement or as an organized church in Indonesia. So your Protestantism and Roman Catholic church we are talking about here. The majority of Christians live in Papua, in eastern part of Indonesia, West Papua, East Nusa Tenggara, North Sulawesi, also eastern part of Indonesia. So there are majority in these places, in these provinces, but then there are minorities in most other provinces around Indonesia. All these denominations in the Roman Catholic Church play a role in educating and providing healthcare and social work to the people, Christian as well as others. And of course, education is very important, as we already talked about earlier. So you had mission schools in Indonesia. The Dutch tried to govern or control the mission, the Christian mission in Indonesia during the colonial time. Then the post-colonial governments from 1945 also tried to regulate the mission. So, missionaries, the building of a house of worship, the coming of the mission from foreign countries, all these were regulated by the government to make sure that there was no tension and conflict on the one hand. But on the other hand, many Christians saw this regulation as being discriminatory against their presence and mission, and so you have this tension, among religious communities in Southeast Asia, especially in Indonesia and Malaysia as well. The state of Indonesia state the religious freedom. So the 1945 Constitution of Indonesia states the state shall be based on oneness of God, and then the state shall guarantee the freedom of religious believers to observe their beliefs and religions. So these articles of the Constitution are there. Constitutionally, there is a religious freedom. In reality, you have peace and harmony, but you also have some problems and discriminations and limitations and constraint and so on and so forth. Just to give you some pictures of the churches. These two churches are in Java. So one in Semarang, another one in Yogyakarta. As you see here, the one in Yogyakarta, this is in Central Java. Yeah. So you have some Hindu, Buddhist influences, in the church, right, in the building. As you see here, the decoration and the ornaments, and even you have here statues. to give you a sense of localization, right? Localization of Christianity in Javanese context. So you have some local, elements in that. This is another one, is a depiction of Jesus as a Javanese king at one of the churches in Java. Uh, just to one way of um, transmission of a religion in a local context is to use local figure or history or belief, culture, so that people can easily connect to the new ideas with the already embedded beliefs or cultures. This is just an example, right? Of course, Jesus in America or in Europe are white, and you will see some depiction of Jesus in different cultures in many different ways. In China, in Africa, in Asia, you might have different depictions of Jesus. That's just one aspect of localization, right? We always talk about it, localization, make things foreign local, and then that helps the process of conversion to that religion. This is a Catholic, church, cathedral in Jakarta, one of the famous cathedrals. So you have here in Jakarta, side by side, where it stands side by side with a mosque in Jakarta. But anyway, just give you a sense of architecture, church architecture, amazing architecture, at the same time, so very spiritual. So this is at the outside, and you have the inside. This is the cathedral, Roman Catholic Cathedral in Jakarta. All right. Another aspect of localization is the celebration of Christmas. So Christmas in Indonesia is a public holiday. It's a national public holiday. So national public holiday, as well as Muslim festivals, Muslim, holidays, Hindu holiday, Buddhist holidays, Confucian holidays, Chinese holidays, Chinese New Year. So they are all public holidays in Indonesia. So everyone, basically it's a holiday. Even though the state is Muslim majority, 87%, I already mentioned, but it allows different religious communities to celebrate the religious holidays. Right. In Papua, on one of the pictures here, and the images here, you feel this is one of localization. So where during the Christmas time, they would show their gratitude and also togetherness and love by eating pork together. So they had this local tradition, when from the Christmas Eve and then Christmas Day, and you have this togetherness by eating pork together. They're cooking pork and then eating pork together. And that's just an example of localization. Another example of localization is in Yogyakarta, in Central Java, where you have a Christmas celebration by inserting the shadow puppet performance. So you had remember shadow puppet, the shadow puppet that Muslim missions also used when they tried to convert people into Islam, and the shadow puppet used the Hindu, epics, Ramayana and Mahabharata, right? So Christian also use the stories and wayang, the shadow puppet, in order to convey the message of Christmas message. So that's another example of localization. All right, that's in Java. In another island, it's called Kalimantan. That's also in Indonesia. You had the indigenous population, right? I hope that you still remember Iban, the headhunting, when we talk about the indigenous people, right? Headhunting, and Christians try to figure out, right, how to minimize this practice of headhunting. So instead of new skulls, they use old skulls and transport and trade, and so that's another way of making it less, sacrificial. In other words, they stop killing, and slaughtering the enemy for the sake of this cultural religious tradition of the old time. So missions also try to change part of this, and instead of, as you see here, they introduce exchange of skulls. So they already skulls, but they just trade or exchange them. That's another way of try to change part of it, but not really all of it. Another one is how they saw Christianity in Borneo or Kalimantan, that Christianity to them proved more powerful than the old custom. And then another way is that the Christian, Protestant churches and the Roman Catholic try to, to coexist, and by dividing the areas into this particular area, is a Protestant area, and this one is a Catholic area, things like that. So they share the region, so that they can avoid conflicts. Because you had many denominations, then they try to also unify these churches. In 1950, for example, they tried to build a communion of churches in Indonesia. So in other words, they try to gather and make less tension among the denominations, centering around Jesus Christ as the unifying figure there, to realize the united Christian church in Indonesia. So in more than 26 regional communions across Indonesia. All right, so it is like an umbrella organization for all these churches, especially Protestant churches, so that they can meet and then organize and coordinate and avoid tension, and make more like ecumenical movement in globally, when we talk about global arena. But in Indonesia, they try to make it like national umbrella organization for all these churches. To give you more specific cases about Christian figures in Indonesia, you will read this in one of the chapters of the book. So you have a Jesuit missionaries, for example, which try to use the wayang, the shadow puppet, and the selamatan. The selamatan, the communal meal, the communal meal, the communal meal that they share food, right? So the Catholic missions also participate in the communal meal, also participate in the wayang performance, and even circumcision, which is because locally you had already this practice of circumcision. Another one is Henry Kramer. This is the Dutch, who believed that Protestantism was superior over Javanese mysticism, the local mystic idea and culture. And he believed that attachment to Christ has to be above any local cultural identity. So that's one way of interpretation, right? And another one is Sam Ratulangi, who believed that religion and politics should be separated, so that different religious communities can be united instead of separated. Because according to Sam Ratulangi, politics divides, religions unites. And then another figure here, Jesuit priest Bana Wiratma. He says, oh, excuse me. All right. Thank you for muting yourself. All right. Uh, Bana Wiratma, Japanese or Christian, this is not a question of an alternative. To become a Christian doesn't mean alienating yourself or oneself, but rather finding oneself and one's life. The religious experience of the scriptures are at the same time the religious experience of a particular culture. So for this priest, a Jesuit priest, being Japanese and being Christian are not a contradiction. You can be both religiously Japanese, I mean, culturally Japanese and religiously Christian. And that's just a way of integrating both religion and culture into one of your own. Another figure is Dharma Wijaya, using the wayang figure. Wayang figure is the shadow puppet figure. The wisdom, social engagement, solidarity, endurance, and many other human qualities which are found in the Panakawan. Panakawan is the figures in the wayang, are also found in Jesus, who by Christian is seen as the perfect human being. This is it's another interesting way of combining or integrating or figures in the wayang stories and Jesus. Because wisdom, social engagement, solidarity, also the qualities that Jesus show. That's why Javanese culture and the teachings of Jesus were not a contradiction. That they support each other, and that's why it is easy for them to be Christian. Just an example of localizing Christian teachings in Japanese context. Of course, coexistence is there. Some conflicts, yes, is as in any other place. You will find coexistent harmony as well as tension and conflict. So in Sumba, in Indonesia, some local people see worship of spirit as custom, local custom, as kinship obligation, not incompatible with the teaching of the church. Although some others see incompatibility. So some say they don't contradict each other, others say they are incompatible. And aspects that they really discuss and debate and agree or disagree about funeral, about destination of the soul after death, marriage, about feasting, about curing ceremonies, healing ceremonies, divination, predicting of the future using certain local astrological inspirations, for example, and also the practice of offerings to spirits. All these practices, would bring some hybrid culture or conflict and tension. This is just a picture of a Protestant missionary talking to local peoples in Sumba, Indonesia, in early 1925, 1929. This is a Dutch Protestant missionary. So you have also syncretism, right? Again, the term syncretism, you can problematize it, okay? You don't have to agree with this term. This is the term that some of the authors use, basically to, syncretism is combining different elements from different cultures, but they don't blend with each other, right? They just simply syncretic. Bible reading and Christian blessing in Malay. So you have that Christian thing, and then followed by a local ritual by a traditional elder, not connected to Christianity, but they dedicate their ritual, this different ritual, in one place, one time, and then they share the meat, and then they share the meat to each set of deities, to different spirits, and then they divide this meat to among the guests according to their professed religious preference. sometimes Muslim local figures also join them, so that you have a Christian priest, Muslim leader, and then local customary figures, side by side, joining the sacrifice and joining the feast, right? So this happens in Indonesia as in other places. In Indonesia again, if we talk about Protestantism in Indonesia and in Thailand, or Siam, Siam is the old name for Thailand. You can see different differences. Why, for example, in Thailand you have less Christians than in Indonesia? Some of the explanations why significant minorities of Christian are in Indonesia, not in Thailand, right? Indonesia was under the rule of a Protestant colonial power, right? So that's why, colonialism play a role. A Dutch Protestant colonialism in Indonesia. Siam or Thailand remained independent of colonial rule. So Siam had become Buddhist, and they were not colonized by European power. The second explanation for this difference in the size of Christian population in Indonesia and Thailand is that the peripheral people were smaller in Siam than in Indonesia. In other words, in Siam or Thailand, you already had predominantly Buddhists, and you don't really have like, small communities, tribal communities, which didn't have any religion, right? And the number is very small in Thailand. So while in Indonesia, you had many small communities on the mountains, on the hills, in the forests, remote areas, right? So they become subject of Christian missions, and that's why Christianity becomes quite strong in this remote and ethnic communities in different parts of Indonesia. That's the second reason. And the third reason might be that the Protestant began mission much earlier in Indonesia than in Thailand. Yeah, so in terms of timing, it's already more or earlier than Christians in Thailand. In post-colonial Indonesia, after 1945 independence, you had Protestantism being one of the religions of the book. I don't know if you still remember the 5 principles, the state philosophy of Indonesia, when we talk about Islam and talk about Indonesia earlier, right? The Pancasila, the 5 pillars, belief in one God, humanism, nationalism, democracy, and social justice. So the first pillar is monotheism, or belief in one God. And this state philosophy is also very important in allowing the existence of religions that believe in some kind of one God. So monotheistic belief. So that's why it is recognized. So Protestantism had become recognized in Indonesia because of this state philosophy. Charges of communism, 1920s, you had a socialist, communist figures and also movements and parties. At that time, you had new movement, new era. Then you had 1960s, 65, 60, it's considered a coup d'etat, in Indonesia by the Communist Party of Indonesia. And because of this, the military had the excuse to, banish this people charged of communism. And many of these peoples, they try to live safely, and then they turn to recognize religion, and Christianity is one of the religions that they turn to in order to avoid the charges of communism. or Islam. So Christianity is one of the religions that they consider, when they are charged of communism. So that's a really interesting context, political context, right? Um, all right, so that's Christianity in Indonesia. Any question about Christianity in Indonesia before we move? If you had, I just want to check. All right, let's move on. In Malaysia now. In Malaysia, Christians account for 9%, around 9%. Muslims around 59%. Buddhism and other Chinese religions 26%, and Hindus 5%. Out of this 9% of the Christians in Malaysia, you had the Bumiputra, they call themselves the indigenous, the native people. So about 8.8% all these natives. In other words, they are Christians, local Christians. And then you have Chinese descendants, also are Christians, about 11% of the 9.2%. And then 404% of them are Indians, Hindus who convert to Christianity, or maybe Indian Christians already from the beginning. But anyway, so you have this demography, just to give you a sense of the size of the Christians in Malaysia. By the way, Malaysia is a Malay state, right? Malay is that consider Malayness as very central to the idea of nationhood. And then religion is very important. So for Malays to be Muslim is to be Malay, and to this is integration of religion and ethnicity. But you have a sizable Christian minorities here in terms of number. Some of these missionary groups in Malaysia, the London Missionary Society, Presbyterians, Christian Brethren, Methodists, Evangelical Lutherans, Seventh-day Adventists, Assemblies of God, and others. So Malaysia, even though Islam is a state religion, we can say, Christian missions exist and developed. They have some freedoms especially in missionizing among Christians, because the regulation in Malaysia is quite strict that you cannot convert Muslim into Christianity. It's considered punishable. But then again, there's some tension here, and dialogue and meetings between Muslim and Christian in Malaysia, and so on and so forth. British non-interference in matters of Malay customs and religion in Malaysia and Malaya at that time also helped missionaries focus on Chinese and Indian immigrants rather than Malay, because Malays would most likely have become Muslim. So they don't convert Malays. Instead, they try to convince the Chinese and Indian and others to Christianity. Again, because of the context of the history, culture, politics. So for them, really difficult to convert Malays to Christianity. This is just an image of one of the churches that had been there since 1924 during the British time. And you had mission schools. Significant Christians you would find in Penang, in Malacca, in Sabah, in Sarawak, and among indigenous peoples, the Ibans that we already talk about quite often, and Dayaks. So Iban is one of the Dayaks, and Dayak is more general. So you have indigenous peoples also converting to Christianity. And then you have also some kind of fellowship, National Evangelical Christian Fellowship of Malaysia, and then the Christian Federation of Malaysia. So all these organizations try to organize, Christian missions, schools, charities, humanitarian efforts in Malaysia. I think it is very important to understand also the translation of the Bible in Malaysia. So the term for the Bible in Malaysia and also in Indonesia is Alkitab, Alkitab, which is very interesting. Why? Because Alkitab is Arabic. It's an Arabic term, and it means the book. And so you have this local language, Arabic loan word, turning into local Malay Indonesian language, Alkitab, as book. And then Christian missions use this term, the local term that borrowed from Arabic, to refer to the Bible. So Alkitab is the name of the Bible in Malaysia and in Indonesia. And you already had a translation of the Bible into Malay language as early as 1612 by a Dutch. But then it was published and then it was spread to Malaysia and part of Indonesia. But in the Alkitab, in the Bible, you have like restrictions that this Bible was not to be circulated among Muslims. So this Bible or this Alkitab was not for Muslim, only for Christians. Then the name of local terms, local terms for Lord is Tuhan, which is a Sanskrit, Tuhan, Sanskrit, and God. In Malaysia and Indonesia, God is called Allah, which is also a name for Muslim God, Allah. That's another interesting fact that you can find in Indonesia and Malaysia. So Allah is the name for God for Muslims, but also for Christians. Of course, Muslim and Christian would understand, similar and different ways of what Allah means to them. But in the case of Allah for Christians, this is God the Father. And then you have, of course, Jesus and Holy Spirit for Christians in Indonesia and Malaysia as well. But interesting thing here is it is the same term, but has different meanings, right? All right. That's about localization again. When we talk about the localization, you can write these things when you answer your midterms. When we, about localization of Christianity. Education, right? Education is administered by the Ministry of Education, and that happens also in Indonesia. In Malaysia, you have also Bible knowledge subject for Christians. Christmas is federal public holiday. So all the states in Malaysia would also celebrate Christmas. However, Good Friday is not federal public holiday. Good Friday is holiday in particular state, in Sabah and Sarawak, because in Sabah and Sarawak, you have quite significant Christians there. And then there's kind of autonomy, that Christian in these states of Malaysia, in Sabah and Sarawak, they had a state public holiday. But Christmas is all the states. It is a federal public holiday, as well as in Indonesia. All right, so we're done with Christianity in Malaysia. It's very brief, but I hope you could have some idea about how Christianity's, living and operating, Christian mission operating in Muslim majority countries like Indonesia and Malaysia. How about in Buddhist majority countries like Myanmar, Thailand, Cambodia, Laos, and Vietnam? This is again very brief, okay? If you're interested in a particular country, there's some literature about that. This is to give you some overviews. So in Myanmar, for example, in Myanmar, you have indigenous tribes, the Chin, the Kachin, Lisu, Laha, the Karens. So all these indigenous tribes have converted to Christianity. So they account for around 9%. Then you have the majority Buddhists. In Thailand, again, it's very, very basic. Christian minority usually is in the hills, on the hills. Again, the indigenous populations would convert to Christianity. In Cambodia, also in Laos and Vietnam, although there's some tension, again, communism and Christian theology also are often in conflict. Like Islam and communism in the case of Indonesia, you have Christianity and communism in Laos and Vietnam. There's some tension there. So that's how it is now. And later, so if you talk about Vietnam, why some of Vietnamese would have converted to Christianity, learning the local language and preaching directly to the people. So you have the romanization of Vietnamese into Quoc Ngữ, although written in Chinese characters. So this is one mode of transmission. So when you have a Vietnamese into a Latin, then it helps it helps spread also the religion. That's why it is quite successful in Vietnam. Native clergy necessary. That is very interesting because when you had a foreigners, foreigners, foreign priests, you need also native clergy. There's some tension in the early time where you had, can you allow local peoples to be priests? And of course, this discussion also happens in different parts of Southeast Asia. Native clergy, when clergy or when priests could be local, it helps boost the process of conversion to the new religion. Then you also have the localization of Christian symbols, the cross, holy water, and others also help, ease the process of conversion in Vietnam. Another reason why some of the Vietnamese had converted to Christianity is because of their perspective of Christian knowledge as being modern knowledge, because missions or missionaries had this scientific knowledge. They taught math, geography, history, physics, chemistry as a priest. So the local would saw this, so you have this priest, Christian priest, teaching me math and geography, and then they also taught me, the Word of God or Jesus, the love, and so on. So that's easy for them to see this connection, right? The connection between science and Christianity. That's also one of the reasons, according to some scholars, why some Vietnamese would embrace Christianity. All right, another case is Karen, the tribe or the ethnic group called Karen in Burma in Thailand. For the author of our textbook, Popular Religion in Southeast Asia, Robert Winsler, and the very existence of Karen ethnic group itself was a consequence of conversion, which is very interesting. So in other words, you didn't really have this ethnic identity, Karen, before Christian mission. So Christian mission helps solidify, helps strengthen this ethnic identity, which is very interesting. So anyway, so you have that kind of suggestion. Of course, we can discuss more, and we have to discuss that even further about this connection between ethnic identity and religious identity. But here we are. Animists, we call animists before, customary ritualists, Buddhists, Christians, including Roman Catholics. They also play a role, and they coexist with indigenous people. From the perspectives of the people, the current people, conversion to Christianity mean joining a religion of civilization. again, this is quite the case that we already talked about earlier. Christianity as a modern religion, because they introduce clinics, they introduce schools in these remote areas, they introduce housing, the idea of cleanliness, and so on and so forth. So they saw this conversion as converting to uh, civilized, progress, modern, you know, culture. Creator God Yahweh, parallel to biblical story of the creation of the world, Yahweh, and the story of the lost book. There's some discussion whether which one come first. Is it this notion of local God way was from the local area, or actually was transmitted from outside and then became localized throughout history, and then the Bible was introduced, and then they tried to use this Yahweh, the creator God story, so that they would embrace this notion of one God as the creator, one creator God. So you have a local idea of one God, and then biblical idea of one God, the creator God, and then that's coexist there, or even complement or support one another. And of course, the story of the lost book, this local story of the lost book, then it turned out this Bible as the lost book. All right, so that's a current. And in Thailand, you have also cases of localization, right? Again, our theme again and again is localization. How local people understand and interpret world religions in their own languages and understandings. So for example, the notion of love, rak, in Thailand as the common language. Rak is love in common language. You will find this in one of the chapters of the book. But I'll give you the summary of this. So rak as the common language, love, to also imply the love of Jesus, the love of God. And then seeing Jesus as the true friend and so on. So local people make some connection, make some connection between the teaching of Jesus as love as the teaching of Jesus and the local idea of love, right? So local idea of love and then Christian idea of love combined. It's the scholar in one of the articles used the term orthodox hybridities. If you don't have to agree with this term, right? But the notion of hybridity again is very important. Some use this term hybridity in order to understand different elements becoming one without necessarily contradictory. It's just hybrid, like when we talk about hybrid culture. So the notion of love is one of them, and then the notion of divine power. How the missions, operate in this. How did they try to convince the people in Thailand to accept this idea of God's power? They already had powers. They had already worship spirits, right? Spirits. So one way of negotiating this seemingly contradictory ideas is to understand that these spirits are hierarchical. So you have a hierarchy of spirits at the time Jiao, the hierarchy of spirits. So you have the spirits at the national level, and then you have the spirit as the district level, and you have the spirit as the household level. All the spirits don't necessarily fight, so they are necessary. Then, so you have this hierarchy of spirits, and you have divine power, either divine power as God one, but they already had non-spirits, and they don't see this God, one God, or the Trinity, and then also the spirits they already had known. They don't see this veneration of spirit as contradictory. Another aspect of potential tension between Buddhist idea and Christian ideas is the notion of heaven and hell. So you have the notion of heaven and hell introduced by the missionaries. Then how about nirvana? How about Buddhist nirvana? And then there was a karma, the cause and effect. So they try to negotiate this, right? Some say that these are entirely contradictory. That Buddhist ideas of nirvana is different from Christian idea of heaven and hell. But some try to figure out how they can, necessarily see as not necessarily contradiction. Again, there's some more discussion about this. Well, the point is some local peoples still keep or do not give up their old beliefs, even after they convert to Christianity. And some of the Christian missionaries, embrace these local expressions of spirituality and cultures, right? While they are also trying to teach and change some aspect of these local beliefs and try to introduce, as they consider, the Orthodox beliefs and doctrines of Roman Catholic Church or whatever Christian Protestant denominations they belong to. So this always is the theme that you find in Southeast Asia. That's why it's very interesting and very important to understand this process, right? Of different cultures, different religions, different traditions, how they interact in particular time and place, in particular society. And that's why you have Christian churches are so diverse. One of the articles that you have talks about diversity of Christian churches in Southeast Asia. It might be useful to just have an overview of this, yeah, which is quite interesting. This is another way of understanding the diversity of Christian churches in Southeast Asia. So there are 4 of them, according to one of the authors. Popular piety. Popular piety, we talk about popular religion in Southeast Asia, considering healing practices. They also, relate to spirits, festivals, saints, the piety, local indigenous piety of Virgin Mary, the worship, the charismatic worship, popular. In other words, the ordinary people, how the ordinary people themselves understood Christianity. That's one characteristic, one feature, one, let's say one form of expression. Then you have mega churches. So mega churches are developed in Bangkok, in Singapore, in Manila, in Jakarta, in Kuala Lumpur. So in the urban areas, they are middle class, they are rich, they are, well, middle class, educated, and then they emphasize prosperity. Just like in the United States of America. So you have that mega churches as well in Southeast Asia. It's a new phenomenon, but it's very important phenomenon to analyze. Then you have global churches. Global churches, the churches are local, but then they wanted to outreach globally. So they become more global or regional, at least. Hope of God in Bangkok, Iglesia Ni Cristo, Church of Christ in Manila had become also quite regional, and even also in the United States among some Filipino immigrants in the United States. Anglican Church in Singapore also, but in other parts of Southeast Asia. So the churches that become global. Then the last but not the least form of expression is the struggling churches. Well, struggling churches is another way to say that many of these churches try to emphasize, social justice idea. Social justice like poverty, persecution, discrimination in their countries, try to eliminate or reduce conflict, um, and so try to address climate change. Also, they try to help with the earthquakes, with the floods, with the crisis, natural disasters in Southeast Asia. So the struggling churches basically are also churches that are very important and significant in Southeast Asia. Uh, Basically, the main idea, social justice, and social justice is one of the contemporary issues in Southeast Asia among Christians. So social justice, because of the um, social gap, socioeconomic gap between the haves and the haves not in Southeast Asia. So you have churches playing a role in, providing awareness, promoting awareness of the need for struggling for social justice. Women rights is another contemporary issue that Christian nuns and also priests have been promoting. Um, Environmentalism, like green movement. So churches also play a role in promoting the danger and the threat of global warming, for example, and deforestations, that the forests becoming less and less, and then they are concerned about the environmental impact of this development, economic development. So churches also contribute to the increasing of awareness among the people. Human rights abuses also, the churches also play a role in the struggle for eradicating human rights violations. Liberation theology, the theology that is concerned about social justice, also has become an important theology among Christians in Southeast Asia. They promote this liberation theology for social justice, for religious tolerance, for interfaith cooperation, and so on. Another contemporary issue is pro-life versus pro-choice. Again, quite like in America, where you have this debate, even political debate, culture wars between pro-choice and pro-life, with regard to abortion. So you have different opinions there, different debates that you can read and engage. One of these agencies, is nuns, the activist nuns we call. We call activist nuns because they are nuns and activists. They are nuns and political. One of them is the Missionary Benedictine Order in the Philippines. They promote the idea of clean and green. So this is the green movement among the churches. One of the famous nuns in Manila, in the Philippines, considering herself as feminist, nun and feminist, Benedictine Sister Mary John Mananzan in Manila. Just to give you, names. No to terrorism. Leave martial art. So martial is during the President Ferdinand Marcos. So the nuns, try to protest that martial law. And you have also other themes and issues that they are concerned about, peace, and so on. So the theology of struggle, we can call theology of struggle. In other words, to what extent churches should engage in politics, right? Theology of struggle. In other words, to be Christian is not to be just, staying in the church and doing nothing. So they believe that church teaching should be implemented in the real life, in the spiritual life, in salvation, but also to help the oppressed, uh, to be in the side of the marginalized. And that's one of the theological discussion in the Philippines, Indonesia, in different part of Southeast Asia. And I already mentioned liberation theology, right? It's a liberation of the marginalized, liberation of women, liberation from imperialism. So you have different meanings of liberation here, but basically it's a struggle for justice. The issue that I already mentioned, the birth, the abortion, but you also have the birth control, family planning issue in the Philippines, also in Indonesia. So basically, this is how the Christians also try to contribute to the debate, to the public debate, right? Religion and public discourse, religion and public debate. So birth control is one of the debates that religious communities feel that they need to contribute to the discussion, to the debate. One of the Catholic authors says, I consider artificial contraception to be a very destructive practice which ruins Filipino values, value of life, value of the family, value of the relationship. Again, this is one of such contentions. You will find also other contentions, but this is to give you a sense of the debate, right? Natural family planning versus artificial contraception. So they believe that family planning has to be natural. It cannot be engineered by any type of technology like artificial contraception. And then you also have the slogan, the right of women to choose, with regard to the family planning, birth control, or even abortion. So you have here some aspects of abortion debate, pro-lifer versus pro-choice. You have some statistic, and how the church, they believe, should also play a role in, either supporting or protesting, especially protesting in this case in Roman Catholic organizations. Abortion are considered illegal. But again, you have different voices and then discussions for and against this. And that's why it is very important. The point that we are trying to make here is that churches, Christianities also contribute to the public life, right? Churches are not only staying in the churches, in the families, in the private lives. They also, in Southeast Asia, are very vocal in promoting the theologies and promoting the aspirations and ideas and programs in the public debate. That's the point. And with regard to how they address this particular question, you will find diverse perspectives on this. Lastly, but not the least, this is the last topic for today. So Christianity in Southeast Asia, Christianity has a religious importance apart from Hinduism, Buddhism, indigenous religions, Islam. Christianity has become a majority religion in the Philippines, especially the Roman Catholic Church and some Protestant denominations in the Philippines, and also in Timor-Leste, the youngest nation state, independent of Indonesia. That's why East Timor or Timor-Leste become predominantly Catholic, because Portugal colonized by the Portuguese. That's two countries where you have Christian majority. But you have minorities around 9%, 10%, or less than 2% Christians in most other countries. Yeah, in Indonesia and Malaysia, and then you have in mainland Southeast Asia where you have the majority Buddhists. Culturally, of course, Christianity also play a role in making people more, in some way, Christians, in other ways, Western, modern, singing, architecture, songs, literature, you mentioned it. So culturally speaking, um, Christianity also have had a great, albeit changing, impact in Southeast Asian cultures. Educationally also, schools, colleges, seminaries, introduced by the missions, and also different vocational programs that you can find in Southeast Asia. Medical, like clinics, hospitals, Christian hospitals, administered by Christian organizations, and of course, religion in the public life. Yeah, the debates that we already talk about struggle, about abortion, about the environment, right? About human rights, women's rights, and so on. Okay, I should stop here. So we are done for now. Um, I hope this is quite an overview for you about Christianity in Southeast Asia, the transmission and the localization of Christianity in Southeast Asia.
Professor Ali?
Yes.
Quick question. For our midterm questions, can we reference your slides as well? Or you just want us to focus on the readings?
Right. If it is specific enough, and you can of course refer to the lectures. Yes, that's fine. But I would also encourage you to refer to the readings as well. So so that you can find more specifics. Of course, my slides or my lectures also are specific, right? There are some cases, some names, you can use them as well. So yeah, you can.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. You're welcome. All right, if you are fine, then you can just say here, on the chats. Thank you so much for joining our lecture today, and I will see you again. Today is Tuesday, right? Well, Thursday then. So I'll see you Thursday with another religion, Confucianism.
Thank you. Good night, Professor.
Thank you. Have a good night and stay safe and healthy. Yeah, as always, stay safe and healthy. And I'm still working on the papers. Yeah, and as soon as I grade them, you will see them, and of course we can discuss more. Thank you again. Bye for now.